It's hard to believe it's been 16 years since Monsters, Inc. came roaring into the world. Since then, Pixar has brought us some memorable characters, but Sully, Mike, and Boo will always hold a special place in our hearts. Hi, I'm Joe with Channel Frederator, and we are back with the best facts from the movie that had us screaming for joy. So climb out from under the covers and check under your bed and in your closet, because we've got 107 facts about Monsters, Inc. Let's get started. Monsters, Inc. made its big screen debut in 2001. It was Pixar's fourth feature-length film after 2 Toy Story movies and A Bug's Life. It was directed by Pete Docter and co-directors David Silverman and Lee Unkrich. It was Docter's first time directing a Pixar film before going directly to Up and Inside Out. Docter didn't just have to live up to the Pixar name, he also had some pretty big shoes to fill. Monsters, Inc. was the first feature-length Pixar film not directed by John Lasseter. In the end, Docter more than proved himself as a director, but he has said that being the first to follow in John Lasseter's footsteps was a long and sometimes difficult road. The very earliest stages of development for Docter began in 1996. It wasn't until early 1997 that the idea started resembling the movie we now know, and by that time, the human character had already changed from an adult man to a young boy to a little girl. The project was given the codename Hidden City during this time, after the restaurant in Point Richmond. When coming up with a new idea, Docter tried to think of the kinds of things he believed in as a kid. Besides knowing that toys came to life when you weren't looking, he also knew that there were monsters hiding in the closet, waiting to scare him. Then he did what all Pixar movies do, take an idea that people connect with, like being afraid of monsters at night, and then show it in a way that the audience never thought of before. This led Docter and the development team to explore reasons behind why monsters have to scare kids. Their answer to that question led to Monsters, Inc. An early idea was that the monsters scared kids for entertainment, like going to the theater. They sketched out the design for a theater where monsters came to see the best scares. The main character in this version was named Barrymore, after the stage actor Lionel Barrymore. The setting switched from a theater to a factory because the creators felt it was funnier to see the contrast of the huge scary monsters clocking in and out and doing other mundane tasks people are very familiar with. Once they decided on the factory setting, they developed a storyline where the main character gets stuck with a kid who's too old to be scared of monsters. They thought it was a funny power reversal to have a big scary monster put in his place by a little girl who isn't afraid of him. At the time that they were developing the idea, Pixar had a rule against relying on magic because animation had a reputation for always being about magic, and they wanted to move away from that. The rule against magic played a role in creating the door system that the monsters used to get to the children. When they were trying to figure out how the monsters would get into the children's rooms, a door that led to another world seemed like a good balance of magic and science. It was John Lasseter's idea to have the monsters start using laughter instead of screams as their power in the end. Docter actually fought against the idea because he knew that kids would always be afraid of monsters in real life, but he liked ending on the message that positivity is way more powerful than fear. For the previous 2 Pixar ideas, the development team had the advantage of being able to do research for their designs. For A Bug's Life, they looked at insects, and for Toy Story, they used children's toys. In order to guide the Monsters, Inc. characters, they interviewed kids and asked them what monsters looked like. In order for the creators to design monsters who felt very human to the viewer, they had to stop thinking about them as toys and think about them as characters instead. They would ask themselves how each character would respond differently to different situations, just like people. Docter was inspired by the Muppets and Where the Wild Things Are when designing his monsters, but he also wanted to create something that looked totally different. In the end, he hoped to strike a balance between honoring these designs without taking anything from them. The original designs for Monstropolis were apparently intended to look more traditionally creepy and scary. They changed the designs when they realized that scaring was just a job, not a way of life for these monsters. Developing Sully was difficult because he needed to be lovable and scary at the same time. They tried him as a janitor and a failed scarer, among many other things, because they felt like nobody would sympathize with a monster who scares children. It wasn't until they realized he needed to be the best scarer that his character started to become clear. We know that Sully's full name is James P. Sullivan, but back when he was a failed scarer, he was actually going to be named Johnson. In terms of Sully's visual design, Docter felt it was very important to have fur because that made him more lovable. He explains it's the same reason why people dislike snakes and spiders more than rats. Another challenge in developing Sully's design was that the studio wanted to avoid having him look like a man in a suit. This led to lots of experimenting with tentacles and multiple eyes, but they found this both technically and aesthetically challenging. His characterization is what eventually helped them decide on his appearance. He was supposed to be the star quarterback of scaring, so they gave him the look of a big, strong, lumbering athlete. Despite the fact that Sully and Mike's friendship is a cornerstone of the film, Mike actually wasn't in the first draft. The story originally focused on Sully and a little girl and the friendship between them. Docter didn't like the idea of giving Sully a best friend because it felt too similar to Toy Story. Once they started developing the friendship, however, he saw that it was really different, as Mike and and Sully's friendship became the thing that they were at risk of losing because of Boo. Mike was developed from a random background character when the team decided that Sully needed more backstory and more complications when Boo comes into the picture. Early versions of that character featured a monster with 2 legs but no arms. The team thought this was fun for exploring situations where he had to, say, open a door and walk at the same time. With the addition of Mike having only 1 eye, however, it became too complicated to balance those unique features and still make the character feel real, so they decided to give him arms. Mike's name comes from the father of Doctor's friend, Frank Oz, who was a director and performer for The Muppets. Boo's adorable pigtails come from the fact that her voice actor often wore pigtails when she came into the studio, and the creative team liked that for the character. Boo was initially going to be older and more of a handful for Sully. While they liked the idea of her being tough and a little smarter, the young and totally helpless toddler fit perfectly into Sully's character arc as he transitioned from only caring about his work to being more of a father figure. Boo was originally named Mary. It was writer Andrew Stanton who suggested they change it to Boo. While the story was developed by Doctor, Jill Culton, Jeff Pidgeon, and Ralph Eggleston, the screenplay was written by Andrew Stanton and Daniel Gerson. Much like Doctor, you can thank Andrew Stanton for, well, pretty much all of your most beloved Pixar stories. He also wrote the screenplay for the first 2 Toy Stories, A Bug's Life, Finding Nemo, Wall-E, and also directed and worked in story development for several other projects. One of Randall's first designs had him wearing a tuxedo all the time. It went along with an early storyline in which Randall was working for Water News, trying to kiss up to him and prove he should be next in line. While they didn't keep the entire plot, some of the story made it into the movie. Even the door system had its own backstory. Henry J. Waternoose the first developed the door technology and founded the company. They developed a whole story about how the technology had changed and become more compact, and how they competed with another company called Fearco and Scaremasters, who each had their own patented technology. Scream power was another nearly omitted part of the plot. They dismissed the idea at first before Stanton found a way to work it into the script, and they realized how important it was. It gave the monsters a reason for scaring the kids, and shaped the design of the entire world. Joe Grant, a Disney animator who had been with the company since their first animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, suggested the name Monsters Inc. during a pitch meeting, at which point the film was simply called Monsters. Unlike its Pixar predecessors, Monsters Inc. assigned a lead animator to each main character. John Kars was responsible for Sully, Andrew Gordon worked on Mike, and Dave Devan led for Boo. At one point, Sully had tentacles, but a main character who was in so many frames with tentacles proved to be extremely complicated for the artists and animators, so they scrapped the idea. After that, the idea of Sully as a football player stuck in everyone's mind. Unfortunately, this provided a unique challenge for animation, as massive, heavy figures were usually balanced out with slow movements, a concept that wouldn't fit Sully's athletic nature. To help, the animators consulted with Berkeley's Roger KRAM, an expert on the locomotion of heavy mammals. Talk about doing your research. Animating Sully's fur proved to be another difficult task. The Monsters Inc. team actually had to develop a new program called FIST in order to make simulating the fur more manageable. Even then, it was still a huge task. Doctor describes that work as their biggest breakthrough in development. Sully had 25,336 key hairs that the animators used to guide the motion and shape of all of his fur. Remember the scene at the end when Boo touches Sully's hand? They had to hand animate his fur reacting to her touch. In total, Sully's fur was made up of more than 3.2 million hairs. Can you imagine what a bad hair day would be like with that much hair? Designing and animating fur and tentacles for the monsters was very difficult at the time. Even with all the technological advancements since then, more recent movies like Finding Dory and Monsters University still refer to Monsters Inc. as a trailblazing film for their visual designs. FIST also controlled the movement of Boo's shirt. If you look at clothing in Toy Story 1 and 2, it didn't yet move and fold naturally like Boo's does. They also developed an algorithm called the Global Intersection Analysis to keep her clothes from tangling themselves. Who knew a little pink t-shirt could be so complicated? They did have some sneaky ways of making the animation process a little easier. You probably didn't notice the first time around, but if you go back and watch, you might be able to spot that 90% of the monsters in the movie had Mike's tongue. The scene inside the door vault was another complicated task, as it included 500,000 hanging doors to create the feeling of such a vast room. Monstropolis is actually only one part of a massive world the creators imagined. They designed a huge forest where Mike wanted to leave Boo when they first found her, and a whole gag where every time they turned to leave, she would appear right in front of them. Sadly, the idea didn't make it into the final product because it didn't progress the story and would have been technically difficult to execute. Mike Wazowski is voiced by Billy Crystal, who you might remember from the movie When Harry Met Sally, amongst a million others. If you don't remember, I bet your parents do. Mike wasn't the first opportunity that Pixar offered Billy Crystal. He was originally offered the role of Buzz Lightyear, but turned it down due to a conflict. As you can probably guess, he came to regret that decision saying it's the only role he ever turned down that he felt bad about. Luckily, years later when Doctor and Lasseter approached him to voice Mike, he didn't make the same mistake twice. Crystal describes Mike as the most energized, romantic, and neurotic character ever, who is an honest and decent guy, but a little dim sometimes. His character design also reminded him of a tree frog. Sully is voiced by John Goodman, who has lent his voices to roles in The Emperor's New Groove, The Princess and the Frog, as well as appearing in countless live-action films and television shows. Unlike a lot of other animated projects, the voice work for Sully and Mike was done with both actors in the studio together. They felt this helped make the relationship feel more real and emotional. Crystal compares Mike and Sully's friendship and misadventures to that of the 1940s comedy duo Laurel and Hardy. When Crystal joined the project, he requested that Goodman come back to the studio so that they could work together and improvise more, and luckily, John agreed. They recorded voice work for a scene first so that the actors were free to play around with the script before animating the finished product. The creative team would describe to the actors where they were in the scene so that they would have an idea of how to act. Beyond Goodman and Crystal improvising character dialogue, they also did a lot of off-the-cuff comedy that didn't make it into the movie, but had the whole recording studio in stitches. Doctor described working with Crystal as a free comedy stand-up performance, such as the time when reverb was accidentally turned on during a take and Crystal improvised a whole routine pretending he was a sports announcer. When he joined the voice cast, Goodman had just finished filming The Emperor's New Groove, during which he never saw his co-star David Spade, so it was a big change to work side by side in the recording studio. He said the chemistry was through the roof right from the beginning. Doctor described John Goodman's voice work as the heart of the project. All in all, it took Goodman and Crystal 2.5 years to record the part of Sully and Mike. Why such a long process? Goodman explained that they would go into the studio every couple of months to read, and then there would be rewrites and changes to the animation, and the process would repeat. Of course, Mike and Sully weren't the only recognizable voices. Steve Buscemi did the voice of the sneaky, evil Randall. Monsters, Inc. wasn't the first time Goodman and Buscemi crossed paths. Just a few years before Monsters, they co-starred in The Big Lebowski together, as well as a number of other films. Doctor wanted to avoid the mistake of allowing the actors to do silly voices for their characters just because it was animation. He felt this would take away from the human aspect of the characters. With Mike's voice, they compromised, using a slightly more caricatured version of Billy's regular speaking voice. It's hard to imagine Sully being afraid of anything, but his real-life counterpart, John Goodman, admitted to being afraid of Frankenstein. Boo was voiced by Mary Gibbs, who was actually the toddler daughter of a storyboard artist working on the film. They originally liked the idea of a toddler's babbling sounding like a different language to the monsters. In the end, however, she just sounded like an adorable child, which they liked better. Mary was actually only brought into the studio because they needed a young girl for some rough sketches and scratch dialogue, and storyboard artist Rob Gibbs suggested his 2.5-year-old daughter. After they decided to officially use her voice, it took about a year to record all of Boo's dialogue. Because she was so young and couldn't sit still, recording sessions with Mary often involved someone following her around with a microphone. While the final product was well worth it, working with talent as young as Mary made it difficult because they couldn't give her much direction while recording, and when they did, she didn't usually listen. Sometimes, to make the studio environment more kid-friendly, they would tell Mary her lines using a Sesame Street puppet. That's actually one of the few memories she has from the studio, considering she was so young. A lot of the recordings of Mary's toddler babbling didn't get used in Monsters, Inc. Luckily, it eventually went to good use as Pixar used it for the voice of Baby Riley in Inside Out. The musical score was composed by Randy Newman, who had already received Oscar nominations for his work on A Bug's Life, Toy Story, and Toy Story 2. He certainly lived up to his reputation when composing for Monsters, Inc. He wrote all of the music for the film, including the ending title sequence song, If I Didn't Have You, sung by Billy Crystal and John Goodman. After the success of his Pixar hits, Randy Newman sometimes noticed children showing up at his shows, despite the fact that a lot of his other work doesn't appeal to them. When he noticed kids in the crowd, he said he tried to watch his language as best he could. Newman found that writing for movies forced him to push his boundaries as an artist because he produced music that he never would have done on his own. He called his Monsters, Inc. work the best score he had done and said the work was far more elaborate than anything he would do as a solo artist. When working with Pixar, Newman approaches each character as an adult with adult emotions, even though the film is meant for children. The complexity of each character is captured in his scores. For instance, the score for Boo was initially meant to evoke fear because the monsters are terrified of her. Later, her theme changes and the music becomes softer as Sully begins to care for her. Some music buffs may have recognized the sound of Randall's theme music. It was inspired by Italian composer NINO Rota, whose style of music was written in minor and featured trombone and sax solos, which Newman thought suited the evil character well. Sully and Mike made it into the Cars universe. Sully can be seen in the ending credits of Cars as a monster truck version of himself, and both characters appear as cars in the short film Tokyo Mater. In case you ever wondered, the fact that scare gas was a scarce resource was not meant as a comment on our society. It was only meant to raise the stakes for the scarers and make their job more dangerous and important. There were plenty of fun gags throughout the movie that got cut either for time or because they got too complicated. The creators made up several scenarios for Mike to mess with Randall, like sending him through an upside-down door that didn't make the cut. Doctor said he still thinks of the Monsters, Inc. characters even a decade later, and said it's still fun to wonder where Sully might be today. That being said, he also acknowledges that while it's fun to wonder about the little stuff, shaping a whole follow-up movie of what the monsters' lives are like today would be incredibly challenging. Goodman's favorite part of the movie? The message that the power of laughter and love beats the power of fear. He thinks that's an important universal truth, even if it sounds a little corny. Pete Docter wasn't the only director who went on to more success. Lee Unkrich went on to co-direct Finding Nemo and direct Toy Story 3, as well as executive produce The Good Dinosaur. Before and after Monsters, David Silverman was a producer for a little show called The Simpsons. You may have heard of it, and went on to direct The Simpsons movie. The film may have been an instant success, but Docter said its impact didn't become real until more recently, when fans in their 20s started telling him that Monsters, Inc. was the film of their childhood. That made the success real because he remembered feeling that way about Disney films from his childhood. Robert Schnockenberg, author of The Big Bad Book of Bill Murray, revealed that Docter and Pixar execs allegedly reached out to Bill Murray as their first choice for Sully, but never got a response, and so they moved on. Pixar fans all remember the teaser trailer for Wall-E, which told the story of a famous lunch where John Lasseter, Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, and Joe Ranft sat down and sketched out the ideas for what would become some of their most famous films. While Monsters, Inc. was one of those films, Lasseter later clarified that the idea may have first began then, but it took the hard work of many other people for the film to become what it was. That famous lunch took place at the Hidden City Cafe, which we already know was a codename for the film, but as another nod to the location, the cafe actually appears in Monsters, Inc. Sadly, in real life, the cafe closed in 2012. We all know that the monsters were terrified of humans, but do you remember the code that they called when a monster was contaminated by a white sock? It was 2319. Some extremely perceptive fans noted that the 23rd and 19th letters of the alphabet are W and S, perhaps standing for white sock. The Pixar short entitled For the Birds accompanied the film's theatrical release. Not only did Billy Crystal believe in monsters as a kid, but he still believes in them today. Do you still check for monsters under the bed? John Lasseter told Crystal that they were going to do a Monsters, Inc. prequel at a party. Crystal didn't hesitate to jump on board for another film. Mike is Billy Crystal's favorite character that he ever played because he relates to being a little guy in a big man's world who doesn't let anything get in his way. After its release in 2001, Monsters, Inc. pulled in over $577 million worldwide and also garnered critical praise from audiences young and old. Monsters, Inc. has attractions at Disney California Adventure, the Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World, and Tokyo Disneyland. Besides the prequel, there have also been two Monsters, Inc. shorts, Mike's New Car and Party Central. Winning Best Original Song for If I Didn't Have You marked Randy Newman's first Oscar win, but not his last with Pixar. In 2011, he'd win again with We Belong Together for Toy Story 3. Before settling on early November, Monsters, Inc. was supposed to premiere during Thanksgiving weekend, but the date was changed because of the extremely popular movie that was also premiering that weekend. Do you remember what it was? I'll give you a hint. It involved a special little boy and a lot of magic. That's right, Monsters, Inc. moved their release date to avoid competing with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Smart move. Besides being a commercial hit, Monsters, Inc. was also nominated for an Oscar for Best Animated Feature, the first of two that Docter has earned to date with Pixar. For Docter, the most exciting and challenging part of his animated features is coming up with the world, calling that time in development ulcer-inducing time, but also the part that he misses most when it's all over. We couldn't possibly fit all the other awards that Monsters, Inc. won into this video, so we'll just go over the highlights. In total, it was nominated for 4 Oscars, aside from Best Animated Feature and Best Original Song. It also got a nod for Best Original Score and Best Sound Editing. It won the BAFTA Children's Award for Best Feature Film, an Annie Award for Outstanding Animation, and a Grammy for Best Song Written for a Motion Picture, Television, or Other Visual Media. In total, Monsters, Inc. earned 14 wins and 38 nominations among several institutions. Talk about critical success. Upon its release, Monsters, Inc. took Toy Story 2's place as the second highest grossing animated film ever, behind The Lion King. With characters as popular as Sully and Mike, it should come as no surprise that there were several video game adaptations of the movie, including Monsters, Inc., Monsters, Inc. Scream Arena, and Monsters, Inc. Scream Team. The Art of Monsters, Inc. was a book published prior to the film's release. It featured sketches and character designs, as well as behind-the-scenes information on the developmental process and how the film came to look and feel the way it did. As with any truly successful Pixar film, you can find the Monsters, Inc. logo and characters on just about anything, from mugs to baby clothes to Mike and Sully Christmas tree ornaments. The strangest Monsters, Inc. merchandise Docter has ever seen? Some horribly great-looking piñatas and clear knockoff Monsters, Inc. logo and characters while traveling touring overseas. Of course, there are some classic Pixar Easter eggs included throughout the film. You may have recognized a few of Boo's toys, like the Luxo Jr. ball, Jessie from Toy Story 2, and Nemo, who all make appearances in Boo's room. A slightly sneakier reference? Now that you know Boo's name was originally Mary, go back and pay close attention to her drawings, and you'll notice that they're signed Mary. Monsters, Inc. almost didn't make it to theaters. Due to a lawsuit, the film was nearly blocked from premiering right up to the day before it came out. Mary Gibbs' favorite monster might surprise you. She liked Randall the best because she felt bad that her character hit him over the head in the end. Despite stealing our hearts as Boo, Mary Gibbs hasn't done any voice acting since then. And not to be the bearer of bad news, but since Mary is grown up now and, went through puberty, the voice of Boo is all but gone forever. But Boo still lives on in our memories and our hearts. Once again, I'm Joe, and thanks for watching 107 Facts About Monsters, Inc. Who's your favorite monster? Did we miss anything? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to click the bell icon to become part of the notification squad. We have videos dropping every day, so make sure to subscribe to the channel because Frederator loves you.